Ironically enough, the biggest mystery to me in all of One Piece, you know, a story filled with thousands of years of lost history, a guy that can eat 2 devil fruits, and oh yeah, the One Piece that has haunted me for over 10 years now is actually this single page right here in chapter 490. And I think with everything that we've recently learned about Davy Jones and ancient giants and Emu turning people straight into giant demon monsters, I think it's a good time right now to take another crack again at solving this eternal mystery. What are these giant creatures here? And I think most importantly, I should probably catch you up to speed on the Florian Triangle in general, since it's easy to forget all the crazy stuff if you're not super locked in on it like I've been recently. So, the Florian Triangle is, as the name suggests, based on the real-world Bermuda Triangle. But something that I don't think is known as much by people and is pretty relevant for you and me today is that the Japanese kanji for this place labels it as the Devil's Triangle, which is very different. Which also, fun fact, is something that we do call the Bermuda Triangle in the real world too, depending on where you're from. But as for the Florian Triangle, in the story, it's this really creepy and grimy place full of mystery, darkness, and spiritual nonsense going on. A ton of ships vanishing here, death becoming those who enter it, and worst of all, Gecko Moria. I mean, just look at the guy, yike. I do love Oda's weird designs, but this dude just makes me wriggle in my skin a little bit, I gotta say, which I guess is the point. But his young design is very cool, and looking back, I'm kind of imagining how sick Thriller Bark might have been with Prime Moria instead of, you know, Tubby Moria. But anyhow, that's not the point of this video, I digress. The Florian Triangle is home to a lot of oddities, like Brook and the ghost ship Thriller Bark, and our big subject for today, of course, these guys. First appearing in chapter 490, these giant creatures wander the Florian Triangle and dwarf pretty much everything else in the series in terms of size. Well, maybe with the exception of Big Man Zunisha here. I mean, that dude is also big. And so I've always really wondered what these things were, because they make no sense, and we literally have never gotten anything close to a real explanation for them. They do seem to be these truly titanic beasts, massive shadows with piercing blood-red eyes that delve deep into the souls of those who haunt them. Now, I mean, they're just red eyes, but I definitely would imagine that that's what people say if they do see them, you know, which isn't very common because apparently these things love collecting pirate ships, or just ships in general. They crush them, killing or vanishing crews left and right, and during the month that Thriller Bark takes place in the story, 14 ships have already gone missing in the Florian Triangle within just 30 days. Now, a lot of people tend to think that these guys are just a fun little mystery that Oda has thrown in for the fun of it, but when has anything in the story at this point ended up not being hugely important, literally hundreds or thousands of chapters later? Right, never. Everything is relevant, it seems. So, of course, I do think that Gecko Moria was snatching up some people here too, but people were going missing long before he ever pulled in with Thriller Bark from the West Blue. Now, to be fair, it's never really been clear how long that is, but the story kind of frames it out to be an urban legend for decades or even centuries, and with One Piece, anything weird and mysterious from the past is, you know, typically gonna be tied into one key event. You know what's coming. No, it's the Void Century. Now, I am saying that something happened during the Void Century, or maybe even earlier during the First World, that might have created the Florian Triangle. Well, yes, I absolutely am. But I'm not 100% certain, obviously, but it very much seems very likely when you really take a look at these creatures and how Oda specifically draws them. So, what do I mean by that? Well, straight up, look at them and then look at this picture right here. Yeah, I mean, they do look pretty near identical to a Japanese yokai known as the Umibozu. This part is absolutely nothing new to you if you're a diehard One Piece theory head. That's been speculated about a lot before, so if this is you, give me a little bit more time to cook with things and get everyone else up to speed, because the Umibozu is a yokai or Japanese evil spirit that haunts the oceans. What adds to its mystery is that not too much is known about the origin of this legend of the Umibozu, umibozu, but it does have multiple sightings throughout Japan and Japanese history. These giant shadowy beasts do appear to sailors who are just chilling out on calm seas in the dark until suddenly, in the blink of an eye, the seas quickly turn into a nightmare. The umibozu appears, often at night, and the first sight is just this giant black bozu head, and then they just start crushing ships like it's no one's business. Interestingly, sometimes they do appear in a group, not too dissimilar to the ones that we see in the Florian Triangle right here, or they can just appear solo. And they're known to even ask for buckets or barrels of water to drown its enemies, and the only way you can defeat one is to offer it an endless bucket or unlimited barrel so that you can confuse it and get the hell out of Dodge right there. And I'm not gonna beat around the bush, this does seem at that point what Oda was going for, absolutely, for these creatures. But I also think, far from the first one to talk about this, but I do think there is a lot more going on here. First off, I think that these creatures might also be drawing some of their presence and inspiration and design from the very famous Eldritch horrors like Cthulhu. You probably know him best. Now don't worry about it, I don't think that these beasts are actually Lovecraftian big nightmare horrors from universes beyond, even though that would be very cool. I just think that their design and mystery somehow elicit some of the same things. You know, the Eldritch horrors are beings that you can't comprehend with your mere human mind when you look at them. Their forms are too twisted and otherworldly for a regular person to perceive, and their silly little brains just can't handle them. But not you and me. We can't see it on the page because we are absolutely goated. The biggest thing is that they come from a crack deep under the ocean, a place that leaks out this icky darkness onto the world, and oftentimes the Bermuda Triangle is tied to this crack, and you know, maybe Eldritch horrors are tied to it too. At least that's what all the conspiracy subreddits I'm on say. You know, take it with a grain of salt. Okay, so we've got two big inspirations for what they could be, but surely before I go all in on the dark and twisted stuff, there has to be a potential other explanation for them too, right? Nope, you're wrong. It has to be demons. I'm just messing with you. There's totally another idea that could explain these big old creepy guys. We actually have possibly even seen them sort of in the story another time, because there are these big dark creatures, you know, the dragon, the standing demon, and the hellflame serpent on the mural in chapter 1138, shadowy beasts of Titanic size. They kind of definitely fit the bill here, especially the one on the left holding the sun. He's giving me very big Florian vibes, but based on how we see them appear, I do think you could also make a really cool case for us misinterpreting what these things really are, because they could actually be the big spines of something. And that glowing red thing, well, it might just be the deep hell flames glowing through the cracks of these spines, maybe. I don't know, you know in those Godzilla movies when he's just like swimming through the water all casually and you see the iconic back spines of him breaking through the water, or when giant beasts are hibernating and then they start moving and you realize the mountains the characters are on are actually the back of a gigantic beast. What? It could be something like that. Not the first time it would fit into anime, and Godzilla, the entire thing, that is Japanese. But I do think that the Florian Triangle being an actual prison or place that the Hellflame Serpent has been locked up would be pretty cool if that were to be true. And before we move on to all of the other crazy emu stuff that you know is coming, I did want to toss out my personal headcanon that these things are the ancient titans from a long forgotten era of the world. I did make a very big mega theory on that a few months back. I just love the idea that titans, you know, like the big head that we get on Onigashima, used to rule the One Piece world before the gods of One Piece did, and so, hey, maybe these are the last remaining Titans. You never know.
Titans! I wasn't joking about the Titans! Heed my warning!
There is a lot of hints that they might exist. Different video, we're gonna link that below. Alright, with that out of the way though, it is emu time now. And let's face it, when you do see these things and you see emu, they gotta be besties, right? They're basically twins. They literally look so darn similar, it's kind of hard to not just immediately tie them together. Shadowy body, same red eyes maybe, especially when we see emu transform into a giant beast even more similar to these shadows as they attempt to attack Sabo. Like, that big emu there is kind of oozing Florian Triangle monster energy. You kind of gotta admit that. And that should make a lot of sense if you've ever watched some of my videos on that topic or any others in the community. Like, the idea that emu is based on the umibozu as well is nothing exactly new or revolutionary. A lot of it is derived from the idea that Imu's name is Umi, ocean backwards, you know, the Japanese words for the ocean. And this, along their design and the fact that the Gorosei's true forms are all also based off of different yokai and other mystical Japanese beasts, you know, creates a pretty sound argument, I think, for Imu being tied to the Umibozu and thus tied to these creatures right here. And considering now we have seen Imu burst out crazy dark magic and devil spells and be in full demon mode, them having ties to a place literally called the Devil's Triangle in the official Japanese version of One Piece just makes a lot of sense to me, at least, especially when you consider, again, how Oda chooses to draw Imu. I mean, we've even gotten this dang plushie based on Imu's shadow design, so either we've been all wrong and this is just straight up what Imu looks like, or this silhouette will somehow be really important to their design at some point. Which, you know, would work if their dark evil power allows them to transform into an Umibozu. And I actually do quickly want to point out something else that does tie potentially Imu to these beasts, and it's the arc that they all appear in. As I called out before, the Florian Triangle is of course part of the thriller Bark Arc. Try saying that one 3 times fast. Love it. Anyways, I think it makes a ton of sense to have this supernatural area of the ocean focused on pirates, tall tales, and the spooky nature tied to the Halloween and, you know, the entire freaking zombie arc. I love when Oda chooses to blend things like that together to cover a whole subculture of piracy and subgenre of media in the series, matching that together in the story, but this tie goes a little bit deeper than just that. You see, Gekko Moria, we talked about him, the main villain of this arc, at least to me, does seem to foreshadow Imu's powers almost one-to-one. We have talked about this idea before on the channel, but it seems like a lot of pre-timeskip arcs obviously have deep ties and parallels to different arcs post-timeskip, you know, like how a ton of Skypiea stuff seem to appear in Wano again. For today, though, the biggest ones are Moria and Imu. Moria's shadow possession, his ability to force undead and even living beings to work under him by stealing their shadows and putting new ones in, is kind of nightmare fuel if he wasn't such a goofy character. But it's also oddly similar to the Domi Reversi technique that Imu uses to turn people into demons that then have to fight for them. That could be a coincidence, for sure, but I do like to think that it was Oda directly hinting at what the big bad guy would eventually be able to do in the story, and so considering that Imu looks like these beasts that appear in this arc, and Imu's powers seem to be foreshadowed in this arc too, this tie-in between Imu and the beasts is at least a lot deeper than just appearance. Then of course we have the entire Moria thriller Bark thing foreshadowing rocks, and like obviously rocks right now is very relevant with the Imu connection that we're getting in Elbaf, but what if I told you that I think the tie-in is like literally much deeper, as in like 20,000 leagues under the sea levels deeper? And yes, I do know that that reference technically doesn't work if you're a book nerd. Let me have this one. It kind of landed for most people, I hope. I wanted to talk about the idea that the Florian Triangle isn't just some odd spot on the ocean, but in reality, it's a prison or a containment field for these beasts so that they can't escape. And not only that, it's keeping something else way deeper underwater as well. Now you might remember that I have teased this idea with the Hellflame Serpent earlier, but this Florian Triangle could actually be a sealed place for the Abyss itself, the place that Imu straight up draws their demonic powers from. You gotta admit, it would make a lot of sense with all the creepy and ominous stuff going on that a literal void of darkness and despair is straight up under the ocean here, potentially leaking out chaos and dark monsters into the One Piece world that are then trapped within the triangle shape. And another really big idea is that they might even be the reverse version of the giant shadows from Skypiea. You know, how those were cast down and made out to be hypermassive? Well, what if the ancient beasts or titans sealed below in the abyss are casting shadows up from there? I don't know, you know, demonic reflections of beasts sealed in a prison that Imu hid creatures in? In that way, the prison would be something made by Imu to contain a whole plethora of things beneath the Florian Triangle, like titans, some of the other gods in the One Piece world, Davy Jones, anything on the table to be creeping out into this part of the ocean at this point. And it would also explain the name of the Abyss, which is a word used to describe the dark depths of the ocean, of course. As you know, I've been spitballing this idea around a lot lately, and I'd really love to see it come to fruition in the Florian Triangle specifically, and actually found something very curious when I was researching, which was this symbol right here, which is the Mu heaven symbol. Yeah, Mu. A triangle with a center dot that represents the creator's power in the Mu Lemurian symbology we're talking about, right? Especially because Emu refers to themselves as Mu. Now, Mu is a legendary lost continent, very similar to Atlantis, by the way, and was brought to fame by a famous British occult writer. It's even weaved into the Lovecraftian stuff I was talking about earlier, yet another reason I think there is some credence to this idea, and something that would fit really nicely into the whole One Piece vibe, and that occultist thing is another nice touch for this very specific area of the series. Because it's said that Mu, similar to Atlantis, may have been submerged, and that it could even be the Garden of Eden. Now, this is something we have to talk about, especially since we do know that Oda loves these types of stories as well. So, we've got a triangle-shaped part of the ocean that has beasts inside it that cannot seem to leave it and are tied to the occult, perfectly matching the symbol which represents God's seal. The triangle with a symbol reminiscent of Emu's eye in the middle does sound perfect for the Florian Triangle, and in the series, it's got a single big island in it, Thriller Bark. But you know, what if there was another island below it, deep underwater, sealed away in this godly symbol, the symbol of heaven? Heaven as in maybe the sun god Nika kind of heaven? Yes, this is a theory video, but I'm very much aware we're getting into very wacky territory here, but I do think it's a, legitimately very cool connection that could imply that a person like Nika or like Joy Boy sealed away an entire island, possibly even Laugh Tale, just saying, that was home to Emu, the land of Mu, and that the abyss is tied to this place at the bottom of the ocean, and that's why these beasts that look like Emu wander around here. For all we know, Emu could be one of these beasts that has actually escaped it or was simply on the outside of the seal when it was made, and I kind of wonder if Emu truly stole their powers before they were sealed away by Nika, or if maybe the other way around, Emu, as I mentioned earlier, could have been the one to seal it all off to protect the area from Nika or anyone else finding it. I'm not entirely sure which way this would be yet. I mean, the Garden of Eden stuff does connect very nicely too, because that's exactly what we always see Emu be at, right? The flower room inside of heaven, which does seem to draw some direct inspiration from the mythical Garden of Eden. And of course, we have the Adam tree and the Eve tree and the devil fruits, you know, all the biblical stuff. And I think all of this would just work really well with everything that we have currently going on in the story. We don't know much about the Abyss yet, beside its weird occult power to teleport people around the world and the implication that it's also where Emu draws their evil powers from. So it being associated with this place, known for weird occult stuff, would track pretty decently, I think. Also, let's be real, it's a very anime thing to do, to have a dark core that slowly leaks out into the world, causing problems, something that Joy Boy and Nika would probably want to seal off and prevent from spreading everywhere else. It'd be a really cool thing, I think, to imagine Nika or Joy Boy actively preventing Emu or Emu's power from becoming free, opening a whole can of worms for how they might actually be great hypocrites, and Luffy will end up breaking that seal as he's the truest and most freedom-oriented person. And something else I wanted to mention is that this wouldn't even be the first time that we've seen big giant gates associated with Emu, because Emu in chapter 1155 stands face to face with Roxy Zebek before he leaves and then destroys one of the gates of justice. Yes, I did want to talk about them because those things also never really made sense either, and are yet another giant weird artificial triangle, very close to the Florian Triangle in the ocean. We have no idea how old either of them are or why they are where they are. All that we do know is, just like the Florian Triangle, it's this massive triangle formed by Emu, the ruler of the world government, with these three insanely titanic big gates. I guess technically we don't know even if Emu made them or if Emu just sort of hijacked them and put the world government symbol on them. My actual guess would be that they were built during the Void Century and had a very different purpose back when, they were built and the sea levels were lower, and they might have just been regular gates, but then ended up under Emu's control after they took over the world. But yeah, we have two big mysterious triangles tied to Emu, but what does that actually have to do with what's going on in the series right now? Well, for one, if they're tied to the Abyss and have these crazy big monsters inside them, then we do know by the end of the show that these things will manage to escape. Oda isn't the type of guy who sets up plot devices and then lets them fall through. No, if he reveals a monster somewhere, it will appear and it will have to be fought. If he reveals a power source, it will be activated, and so if he reveals the Abyss is a place that creates big demons, then that will come to fruition, right? I hope. I mean, we could even potentially get an end of the series final battle with evil demon kaiju battling the forces of the world, Emu and the raw power of the abyss versus a giant sun god Luffy, while everyone else has to defeat the various other monsters or titans destroying the world. Just saying, it would be pretty hype to see all the different crews or like groups that Luffy has teamed up with at this point, you know, pretending to be the cast of Kaiju number 8. Meanwhile, Luffy is busy duking it out, Big Size with Blackbeard or Emu, who are controlling these dark monsters that are threatening the entire planet. Pretty sick. However, I did notice I missed something else here, something that could make this plot point go even deeper, because I focused a lot on the triangle, but not Thriller Bark itself. Would that tie into things as well? Well, it probably would, right? And when you realize that it may actually even be God Valley, you know, the place where Rox, Roger, the world government duked it out, then it gets even crazier. So if you want to know everything about how Thriller Bark could weave into this idea, you should really check out this video right here where I break it all down for you. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Thanks so much to all of our fantastic Patreons, and I will see you in the next video.